At 7:07, would everyone please rise and join with me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? We are already on, since we are continuing this meeting from downstairs in room 16, room 12. We are on to item number 3, which is a presentation from the Burlington School District on budget. Superintendent. And I know you have a fairly limited amount of time, so we'll get right into it.
Thank you. Thank you, President Wright, for the opportunity to once again present to you our budget. We know we do have limited time, but we have provided the budget slides to council and for community members to also review online. We'll try to be expeditious as possible, so there leaves time for you to ask questions. Just a quick thumbnail. I'll give you a quick thumbnail. This was an extremely challenging budget year for us. We started out by doing nothing, adding nothing to the district's allotment. Would have had a close to 11% tax increase, and felt that this would not be well received with the community, and wanted to find some strategies to present something that would maintain our quality programs at the same time be acceptable and viable to the community, considering we've had really good support over the last 5 years for our budgets as well as our bonds. So you'll see in the presentation some strategies around adding our surpluses to reduce it, and also reductions that we've had to make in order to bring the tax impact from 11 right down to close to 7%. So it's not where everyone would like it to be, but we're pretty proud of being able to do that at the same time maintaining the programs. So with that, I'll pass it over. Chair, Wood, do you want to say anything before Nathan starts the slides? No?
Move forward.
Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Director of Finance, Nathan Lavery, to flash you the slides here.
Great. Good evening, everyone. So I will move quickly through some of the introductory slides, but if you haven't had a chance to view them all, I'd encourage you to do that when the opportunity presents itself. We began with our mission statement, which is a kind of touchstone to use when we think about building the budget. Obviously, everything we do is toward fulfillment of this mission, including the decisions we make during the budget process. There was a challenging budget landscape, which is kind of a theme of the last few years here, and I won't go into all the details here, but certainly some of these are part of the reason that we face some of the challenges we did when projecting our baseline spending growth. We went through an extensive budget process, including opportunities for public input as well as input from our staff and our administrative teams in terms of the type of programmatic investments they'd like to make. And we follow that up with analysis on the tax impact of those things, which informs the board's decisions regarding which type of investments we can afford to make and where the areas are that we need to reduce our expenditures.
Director Lavery, could you just pull that microphone a little closer to you?
Sure.
Thank you.
Is this better?
And tilt it up a little bit. Thanks. Thank you.
So budget highlights is the first place we want to spend a little bit of time here. And one of the things we did, as I mentioned, was solicit input from the community, from staff, and so forth. And the result of that process was identification of about $4.6 million worth of new investments that people felt were worthy of consideration. That would represent over 46 FTEs. You're not going to see all of that reflected in this presentation, as you can imagine, but it does serve to illustrate the needs that people viewed as being, as existing in our district, and the opportunities to do more for our students. So that was one of the first things that we did in this process. From that point, we looked at those, and at the direction of the school board, we developed some scenarios that would have involved investing somewhat lesser amounts than the full $4.6 million. We did that in order to see what the tax impacts would be of various levels of investment. Unfortunately, based on the variables that inform and produce the tax rate impact, it was ultimately determined that we were not able to make the level of investments that we had even explored during these various scenarios. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide, please. We provide some background information on budget trends over the years here. One of the things you'll notice is a kind of a interesting pattern emerging where the tax rate change, between 3.3 and 4.7% projected, but the education spending changes dramatically from about half a percentage point to 5.5%. Just shows just how impactful some of the other variables are in the tax formula. And the next slide shows just a history of some of the new investments that we've made in prior years. This isn't total increases in budget. This is just showing the kind of new programmatic and personnel we've invested in. So we have made some significant investments over the past 3 budget years, including the year that we're in the midst of right now. A number of assumptions go into the budgetary process, and as Yao mentioned, the baseline budget growth presented a real challenge this year. We projected about $3.5 million worth of increased costs before any new investments in programming or personnel. And that is driven largely by and almost completely by the 4 items that you see up on the slide here. Wages obviously are increased on an annual basis, but the health insurance premiums going up by 13% is significant cost. That's not unique to the Burlington School District. That is something that is being experienced across the state by all of our neighboring districts as well. Special education, increased costs for tuitions for placement of students in special programs and for inclusion services for students that are educated in the district, and also increased projected debt service costs associated with borrowing in support of the high school. The next slide is a quick refresher of the variables that go into the tax rate. I won't go into the detail of them here because we come back to them a bit later. But on the next slide, we show the analysis that Yao alluded to earlier, the tax impact of the baseline budget. So for an increase of $3.5 million associated with just the baseline growth that we identified before, we would be looking, and that represents a little less than 4% total budget increase. We'd be looking at a potential tax rate increase of 10.5% and an income increase in the income cap of over 6%. So those are pretty significant increases, particularly when they don't reflect any kind of new service or good, something that people will be able to point to and say, oh wow, look at this new thing that we got for this amount. So that was kind of the major challenge, and was pretty eye-opening, I think, when we did this tax analysis, to realize that we were not going to be able to make the level of new investments that we've made the past few years. The next slide shows our first step toward tackling that challenge, and that was to apply a surplus of about $1.3 million to the budget. This surplus is the result of monies that we have saved in prior years. It produces a fund balance, and we can apply that to our budget. The effect of that essentially is we don't need to raise that revenue from taxpayers because we already have that money in the bank. And as a result, that step alone reduced the estimated tax impact of our baseline budget from 10.5% to 8.5%. So it was a great first step in the process, and something that we're happy to be able to do, particularly in light of the fact that we're able to do that without impacting programming in any way. Then the challenge gets a little more difficult, and on the next slide you can see we looked at what does it cost to buy down that tax rate further, by which I mean how much would we have to reduce from our projected spending to decrease the estimated homestead tax rate. And you can see the scenarios there. That was kind of the context that we were working in terms of trying to identify not only what type of reductions we could make, but how much we could reduce in order to achieve lower projected tax increases. So then we get to the fun part, identifying reductions on the next slide. There's a series of reductions here. We did our best to minimize reductions that would have direct student impact. One of the first items on there that'll you folks will recognize is our city retirement estimate reduced. So working with Rich every year, we talk about how much money I should estimate for the city retirement, but because of some of the progress that's been made on the city side and the fact that the actuarial numbers have come in a bit lower on an annual basis, I felt like we could reduce our set aside for city retirement and still be confident that we'd have enough to pay the actual actuarially determined costs that we're going to have to pay this year. So that was an example of a reduction that we felt pretty confident in making. As we go down the list, there's a few others here that are worth noting, but in particular, I'll point to the special education cost estimate reduction. So on the one hand, we know that special education costs have been rising pretty significantly on an annual basis. Still, we don't know for sure, and it's ultimately based on the needs of students and their IEP needs. So when looking at this reduction, we felt that we were able to make a reduction here, but with the understanding that if students have these needs identified in their IEPs, we're going to have to pay for them. And so you'll see on the next slide that there's an offsetting increase in our contingency funds, because a lot of the items on this slide are reductions in our kind of estimated growth rates. And while we think that overall they're achievable, it's certainly possible that in some cases they're a little more ambitious than we will actually achieve. And so to some extent, some of these reductions are offset by an increase in our contingency, giving us the flexibility. Obviously, if we couldn't achieve any of these savings, a slight increase in our contingency funds is not going to be sufficient. But we believe that en masse we can achieve most of these in most areas, and we have a little extra kind of room to maneuver, a safety valve, so to speak, if these turn out to be somewhat more optimistic than we actually realize. There's also two positions in here, two central office positions, the in-house counsel position and the district lead principal position, that are eliminated. Having identified those reductions, there's also on the next slide some modest additions to the budget, including investments in safe, inclusive schools, a computer science teacher at the high school, and then as you can see, I mentioned before, the increase in the contingency that to some degree offsets that series of reductions that we saw on the previous slide. The net reduction's nearly $700,000 from the baseline, which if we go forward 2 slides now, we'll skip over the tax rate definitions to the tax estimates. Before I actually get to the final tax estimates, I just want to show the various components of the projected homestead tax rate, what goes into those. You can see an education spending increase of 4.34%. That obviously puts upward pressure on the tax rate, as does the 1.25% decrease in our equalized pupils. The dollar yield increasing actually helps by putting downward pressure on the tax rate. It means that essentially a dollar on the tax rate goes a little bit further. But that is also offset by the fact that the common level of appraisal took a pretty significant step down, resulting in a 3.1% decrease, which anytime the common level of appraisal goes down, it increases the actual tax rate on the bills that homeowners see. So with that, we go to the estimated tax implications. As Yao mentioned, the property income rate, 7.36%. That's a projected increase, which amounts to around $357 on $250,000 homestead. Income payers see a projected increase of 3.18%. The natural question whenever we show these slides is, what's the difference? The difference really is predominantly the CLA. There is a slight difference as well in what the state calculates for a property yield versus an income yield. That gets pretty esoteric, but the majority of that difference is accounted for by the fact that the CLA applies to property payers. It doesn't apply to those who pay their education taxes on the basis of income. This slide just summarizes kind of how we got to where we are. 10.5%, you apply the surplus, you're at 8.5%. Then you further make the nearly $700,000 of reductions, and that puts us down at a 7.36% estimated property tax impact. This is the key language here that would appear on the ballot, and One of the challenging elements of this language is it doesn't directly reflect, for example, the projected tax increases. So the total budget figure includes not only spending that's supported by the education fund, by the taxes we're just discussing, but also all other general revenues, special revenues such as grants and that sort of thing. So that budget is, not directly connected to the tax rate increase, but it is by law the number that we put on the ballot. Education spending per equalized pupil, that does directly drive the tax rate, and that number being 5.66% higher is what puts some of the upward pressure on the tax rate. But as I mentioned before, that 5.66% is not a projected tax rate. So that is often the source of confusion for folks. So this is the language that we would expect, barring any additional changes from the school board, that we would expect to put on the March ballot. I think it's a good place to stop there. We just got our concluding slides and turn it over for questions.
All right, thank you for that presentation. Open it up to the City Council for questions. Councilor Pine, did you have your hand up? Councilor Pine.
Thank you, Mr. President. The obviously the 5.6% is fully justified, I think, based on the work you all done, and I commend the school board for that work. It's hard for our residents whose incomes are not growing by that amount to be able to explain and to carry that message forward. City council candidates end up going to the doors more than most people. So we need help in conveying this message to voters if we're going to get folks to appreciate the need for this increase at this level and what was done to try to keep that increase as minimal as possible, given the constraints we live in. I think the one piece that is not spelled out, and I know we can't spell it out, is what's assumed for increases to teacher salaries. And I think that is something the school board needs to really grapple with when you consider that even though there are many households that benefit from Act 60, from income sensitivity, there are many in my ward who don't benefit from it but are just on the cusp of that and who are really struggling mightily to get by. So I know that it's a very difficult process, but and I think teachers are paid in a way that they incredible value to society, and I believe I'm the son of 2 teachers, so I'm not speaking about this in any negative way, but I just want us to be mindful of the fact that wage growth for the rest of the community needs to be considered when these discussions take place going forward in a very significant way. I think it's really important that everyone contribute their part to the process and the cost of funding this incredibly important service, which in my mind is one of the most important things we do. And I just wanted to say that.
All right, thank you, Councilor Pine. Councilor Busher.
So, speaking sort of to continue that conversation, some of us are seeking re-election or seeking a seat on the council, and a theme that has come through loud and clear is that, and something we've known, but I'm hearing it's more distressful this round. I'm hearing it from some of the young families that have come into the section of the city I represent. We want a healthy mix of people in our community, and they've lived here maybe 4 or 5 years now, and have informed me that some of the people that they interact with have already left the city because they can't afford it. They haven't been here a long period of time. And they themselves, the people that are speaking with me, and this is more than 1 or 2 families that I'm talking about, are feeling that they're just an increase away from having to make other choices about where they live. So having said that, this didn't start tonight. It didn't start in September. I'm on the Board of Finance. It started for me several years ago, really trying to challenge any new position, any increase in compensation, not that people aren't worth it. It has nothing to do with worth, it has to do with what we can afford. So, that's the stark reality here. I see the bind you're in. I see the fixed costs that are driving your budget, and I want to thank you for what you've gone through, and I have confidence in your financial person. I think he looks everywhere he can to find savings. But having said that, I think it's really important that the school department and the school board take ownership for the budget that you want the community to accept and approve. And it would be incredibly helpful if there was a small information piece that could be handed out for those of us going door to door, to give them that information, and to even give them the scenario with the projected cost for the homeowner that has a house of $250,000, and then they can kind of figure out where they fall in that, what that impact would be. That's not insignificant. And we know that we're a community. We're not just a school department. We're not just a municipal part. We're a combined, and we ourselves are having needs. I'm going to talk about one of our needs later on tonight, which is going to ask the community to consider a tax increase for public safety. So I myself am feeling that, I need your help to get the information out. Once again, I can't predict what people are going to do. I think they're thinking long and hard, and if they say no, that doesn't mean that they don't support schools or support the city. It means that they can't afford it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. Councilor Paul.
Thank you so much. So I have one question and then one comment. So the first is, it's been in the news a lot lately, not in Burlington, but it's been in the news in Vermont and actually nationwide, about the issue of students being denied lunch because they owe money. And, Good Samaritans who come forward and offer to pay lunch amounts or even the entire tab for a school district. And I was hoping that you could, because I think it's important for people to know that there's a lot of good things that happen in Burlington, and was hoping that you could speak to that so that others would know how that works in Burlington.
Right, I think I'll start and let Nate talk about the actual financial piece, because there's a financial piece to realize. I mean, philosophically, we believe that all students should be nourished, and we not only provide that nourishment during the instructional time, but we also do dinner times for certain students, and also in the summer programs, free in terms of doing that. And we're able to do that because we've got a great food services department that's able to manage what they do and be able to shift funds to support all students. And Nate, you might want to go into more details in terms of how that happens, but not too much because we don't want people to go to sleep. But.
Well, I will say, to be clear, so we do not deny any student a meal based on ability to pay, period. And the result of that is, on an annual basis, one of the things that we do is we look at balances for unpaid meal debts. And depending on the status of those students, particularly as they graduate, we end up writing off a certain amount of that debt every year. So we have to absorb some of those costs. It's not tremendous, but again, it's kind of part of the philosophy by which we operate our food service. So every student's going to eat whether or not they have the ability to pay.
Okay, thank you. I think it's important for people to know that. And then the other, so that's the good question. The other is just simply, I feel like the ballot language that you're using is, while it may be perfectly legal and you do give people information that they may want to know, I feel that I think that it's important that, and we've been on the council at times, have grappled with long ballot wording, with wording that we feel is not clear and concise. And so we certainly have grappled with this as well. I feel as though the ballot language should say what the tax increase is. And if you have to say up to, or you have to say not to exceed, or whatever it is that you have to say, I think that the voters deserve to know what the percentage increase is. They're not, the average person is not really going to be familiar with equalized pupil. The fact that the projected spending is higher, again, that's interesting information, but I feel like we should be a little bit more upfront with the voters and tell them exactly what the increase is. So when they're voting, they know exactly what they're voting on and how it impacts them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paul, and I would concur with that. Councillor Jang.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I have a question for Chair Wu and also for Nathan. But before, I wanted to take the time to say to the superintendent of the Burlington School District, thank you so much. And we read on the news that you will be leaving your position, but I think you have done an incredible job. And again, whether you elected official, whether you are a leader, nobody's perfect. But during your tenure, you demonstrated hard work and commitment to the success of Burlington students. Thank you very much for your hard work for that. Yep. My first question would be for the chair, Carol Wool. Thank you too for all you do. But I wanted to know if unanimously the school board members approved this budget. That's the first question to you.
We have a meeting after this to officially approve. Once we heard your comment, I have all our fellow board members are here present. We have had, over the last 3 months, meetings about the budget. Our last meeting, last Tuesday, was where we determined, made a motion with regards to the reductions and the investments. And so, as a board, this is what we are presenting to you tonight.
Okay. Thank you. And I mean, I think, sorry, Mr. President and everyone, but I wanted to also to make sure that after you leave here, your presentation, what would be next? What would you be waiting from us, like the council? You know, yeah.
Like Councilor Busher said, we work in unity with you in the city. We consider ourselves partners in this, especially with our taxpayers representing. So our schedule of events were to hear your concerns and then go back as a board to discuss what you have all shared with us and move forward with what we presented.
Thank you. And I think, you know, you did mention that word that I was looking for, concerns. And when we talk about concern in this community, people have been paying for so long for a lot of things. And one of the concerns that I hear all the time, repeatedly, is the $70 million that was voted by the Burlingtonians for the creation of the new high school is not enough. I don't know if it's a rumor or I don't know if it's true, but I think it would be great if you can shed some light on that, or each one of you, any of you.
Yes, I am on the Facilities and Finance Committee with Commissioner Pillsbury, and we are still working on that number. And at this time, we are having some challenges that we look forward to sharing, that we've shared already with the mayor and Board of Finance. But at this time, yes, the status is we are having some challenges with that, but we are still in our estimating phase.
Thank you for your honesty. And I think it is important also to note that, you know, you have challenges over here, you have other challenges everywhere. And this, people have not even digested what they invested for the high school. You encountered some challenges. But I wanted to also just thank you to Nathan, because also you took into consideration that this is not perfect, but you worked diligently, all of you, to reduce, at least to find some way you can still save. But my question is this: where can we find the details, program by program, and school by school, their budget? is that available, and where can we go find it? If, yeah.
So annually, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've produced a comprehensive budget document that we've posted on the website. It's not available yet, and it'll take a couple weeks from when we actually finalize the budget choices to make that available, but you can go and look on the Burlington School District website, www.bsdvt.org, and under the budget heading, there's a lot of information there. There's information both about the budget that, the process that we're going through to develop the budget this year, as well as the budget information from the year that we are in right now, and where you can look and see like line item level detail. You can see kind of discussion about the various programmatic changes, tax impacts, and so forth. So we will be producing that in the next few weeks, as quickly as we can, essentially, to have that out there. And there's also information on there. We actually just posted our fiscal year 19 audit, so we have a number of audit years, all the audits and management letters available to the public there as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Jane. Councilor Polino.
Thank you, Council President Wright. I think that I'll follow up on a couple of things. One, I think, on Councilor Jen's question about the timeline. So, Commissioner Wool, as to, do you expect that the challenges that you're having will create a further delay? Because I do think that any increase we ask to the same taxpayer is in line with when, the higher cost for the high school will come online. So do you expect to delay it further, or are the challenges something you feel can be overcome in short order in the next 6 months or so?
As far as the BHS BTC campus
Yes.
project, at this time, I would say that we had...
Commissioner Will, can you pull that
Yes.
microphone? Thank you.
At this time, we are projecting spring 2021. So we will begin, we've all heard that construction costs increase 6% each year, the delay, and we are confident. The challenges we're having have to do with potentially the 3-acre rule, zoning, things that we are looking or adding to our budget. So we are looking for a 2021 start date, and we are committed to providing the City Council and the Mayor the costs of what we believe the scope of the project is, and we'll make those decisions, I would say, within the next 2 to 3 months. As far as moving forward, we will move forward. What we will present potentially, will be determined at this time, but we have worked very hard this past year. We have not spent any money. We understand the hard work and the fiscal responsibility involved in the planning, so we are taking our time to make sure that we are entering this fiscally responsible. So to answer your question, we are still moving forward with a spring 2021 start to the construction. But to answer your question, will it be $70 million? That is what we will determine or present within the next two months.
Thank you. And my second question is, the question I feel that I will get the most if I knocked on a door will be, this is a cost, this projected spending. Why didn't we budget for that? And I get the sense from your presentation things got more expensive, but why didn't we plan for that in the future, and how can we not have this happen sort of every year?
Understood. And we hear you, and it is our responsibility, and we take it very seriously, because we are as well sitting at the table looking at these expected costs. We are not alone in the state of Vermont with the construction, with our colleagues at UVM. They're seeing the same thing with costs in their athletic facility. So we hear you, and it's our responsibility to be able to equip you before Election Day with like Counselor Bushler had said, those talking points and the facts as they are, and the research that we've done, and the hard work that we've done with the qualified professionals that we've been working with over the last year to get us to the knowledge that we now have to be able to move forward, to improve not only the plans that we've set forth, but again, it's a longer story, but when we went out for the bond, it was conceptual, and it was, Black River Design did present us with the scope of work for that amount, and it's our job to be able to go back to City Council, the mayor, and the taxpayers with the good work that we've done over the past year, and to show, where we're headed and what the reality is, but that we are committed to what we did promise the voters. But I am hesitant to go into any more detail because it is a lot more than just a soundbite here, because I am committed to this project, as is the entire school board and the district and the taxpayers. And so I respectfully ask that I would be given more time to be able to share the stages that we're at currently, and that we, in our timeline moving forward.
Thank you.
I just add, maybe you can clarify, Chair Wool, I think your committee did put a statement out that during the process of resolving some of these challenges, you are not looking to go to the community to increase a bond.
No, not at this time. Nope.
Thank you, Councilor Polino. Councilor Mason.
Thank you,
Councilor Pine.
President Wright. Thank you for the presentation. Can I pivot back to sort of this year's budget off this high school? My recollection, Nate, maybe you can refresh. You guys have had a surplus for a couple of years, and this is about the same number, between 1.3, maybe a little bit more. Is this, looking forward, is the budget surplus going to meet one-time expenses, or are these ongoing expenses such that this will catch up?
So so we're using the surplus here to support general operations. So the challenge, and we bring this up on an annual basis, is you're using money that is one-time in nature to support ongoing operations, and obviously that is not inherently sustainable. On the other hand, we have, a $90 million budget, and so you don't need huge margins in any particular lines to end up with surplus amounts. So while I don't, even this year, our fund balance was somewhat less than it was in the prior year by maybe $150,000, $200,000. That is, it signals the fact that money's not guaranteed to be there year after year. And if that money's not there, the alternatives are either increasing taxes or cutting spending in some other way. But on the other hand, we do our best to carefully manage our money every year with the goal of ending up not only not in a deficit, but with some surplus monies at the end of the year that are available to us. We don't do that by kind of intentionally doing things like holding positions open or not filling vacancies or anything like that, but rather we have tight controls that make sure that we know how we're spending the money, and that there's an approval process that ensures when expenditures are made that there's a budget to pay for them, and that they are reviewed by the people who have budget authority to make sure that they're appropriate and necessary for educating our students.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mason. Councilor Pine.
Yeah, I did want Mr. Lavery to speak to the question that I heard Councilor Polino. I just want to, what I heard him really asking was, on an annual operating basis, isn't there a way to plan for budget growth on the expenditure side? And I'd like you just to speak to the fact that the way our funding system works, you can't really create essentially an ongoing growing fund balance to cover future expenses, is how I understand it. So you've got to come back and go through this process every year and review the finances. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, and that's essentially correct. On an annual basis, we have to go, and it's somewhat different from the municipal process, but we get the money from the education fund based on the budget that we develop. So the only way for us to kind of build in a certain amount of money such that next year, even if costs went up, we wouldn't have to come in and, would be to either increase the budget this year, right? which would just produce an unnecessarily large burden for taxpayers and leave us probably with money left over, or for one of those other variables in the tax rate calculation to work for us in a really favorable way. So for example, if we had a significant increase in our enrollment and were able to serve all of those students without needing to proportionately increase spending, well then the net impact of that would be some downward pressure on the tax rate. But in short, the way that the system works, we get money on an annual basis from the state education fund to meet the needs that we identify through the budgeting process. And the only way to end up with more of that money is to ask for more than we need, which we're not in the habit of doing. Once in a while, we do have certain events that happen. A few years back when we had an event, in association with the city where we had a significant one-time revenue stream, that one-time revenue source, but that's unusual, and we can't plan on that, obviously. So it is one of those things where on an annual basis, we have to do our best to balance the budget and then ask the voters to support it.
Just on that line, I think there is another option. In a healthy year, the board could come forward to the taxpayers and ask for developing a reserve fund, which meets what you're talking about in terms of accumulating dollars on the side for challenges that may come up. So that is an option for the board to consider going forward in terms of, could be for capital, it could be for a program, it could be for different, but that would be a piece that the board would come forward and actually ask the taxpayers, we're going to reallocate this fund balance and keep it in a pot that we'll be able to access for the particular strategy.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That can be done by law, and it has to go to the voters. Again, the funds to go into that would still have to be kind of produced in terms of by the district. So it's not, they don't come for free or anything like that. We would have to, populate or capitalize that reserve fund with something. But that is something we've discussed kind of generally as an opportunity to start setting aside some of those funds. But a reserve fund like that would be more toward one-time costs as opposed to sustaining kind of operating on an annual basis.
All right, thank you. I know you have another meeting. Just one quick thing. As Councilor Busher and others have mentioned, it's a tough year all the way around. We love Burlington. It can be an expensive place for people to live. And I appreciate the $700,000, the hard work that the board did in finding $700,000 in cuts. Is there, maybe not even ask for an answer to this, but I hope it could be considered whether there is anything in the $350,000 in increases that could be delayed for a year to bring the number down a little bit. I don't know if there is. But my one question to you is, where do we stand in regard to the rest of the state in our per pupil costs?
I don't know off the top of my head where we are. That information is available. It always kind of lags a year. Like we won't know what everyone's budgets are for this year until there's communities that don't even vote on town meeting day on their school budgets. But that information is available for prior years. And typically in our annual report, we put a little graph in there that shows kind of equalized rates for some of our neighboring communities. So we can look for that in the future. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head where we.
Well, our last one, I think we were around in the middle, weren't we?
We were around the middle. I think we're a little above the middle in Chittenden County at this point, but I would have to check the numbers to be sure.
All right, thank you. And I would just like to ask all the school board members to stand up. We have a number of school board members in the audience tonight. Thank you for being here. Just want to recognize you and salute your service to the city on the other board in Burlington. We appreciate your hard work. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing what comes out of your next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. Item number 4 is a public forum, and we're late on it, but I could go late because no one has signed up. So I will throw that out there for 1 minute is if anybody wants to speak in the public forum. As always, there are sheets over here in the corner table. Bringing them over to the clerk's office. Would you like to speak, sir?
I gave Lori my note. Didn't you get it, Mr. President?
I do not have it. Yes, as a matter of fact, I do have it. Alex Levine, you have the floor. Welcome.
Hey guys,
Thank you for being
Oh,
here.
pardon me, Mr. President. Please direct my remarks to your fellow councilors. I'm usually here to gripe about something, but I just want to show you all a little bit of appreciation this evening because we know that you guys don't have an easy job. This is probably a pretty sketchy time to be on city council. I don't know if you know, but we just made the papers, like all of them. And Burlington kind of looks like hell right now from the outside looking in. I'm sure that people are beginning to take stock of some decisions that were made in the past few years and think that maybe they weren't the wisest in terms of being more servile to the business and development community than looks good with the hindsight we can look now on it. But there's some good stuff going on too. The 2030 initiatives are amazing and unprecedented. What the Burlington Electric Department is unprecedented, and it is amazing. People come here all the time. A lot of tourists come here all the time, and they keep telling me, they won't shut up about it actually, how great our city is, how special it makes them feel. We still do have something really, really special in this city that's worth holding on to. And even if the buildings get a little bit taller, and even if the waterfront maybe gets a little more crowded than people were accustomed to back in the 1980s, let's take stock together of what makes this city special. Let's take stock together of how we keep the city inclusive, because it is an inclusive city historically, and with the changing population, we have new challenges. People are very much stayed in their ways in terms of whom they expect to see on the streets. New populations are appearing on our streets. They will continue to appear on our streets, and we have an obligation to make them feel welcome, regardless of what features those populations have. So one thing I heard from the mayor when he came to the Ward 2-3 NPA earlier this month is that I suppose the Housing Review Board, they're going to be the first ones to look at some ADU requirements that may be changed in order to excuse parking from being tethered to new housing going up, in-law apartments, some people call them, behind people's homes. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful idea. It's not only going to serve the embattled property owners with their high property taxes, it's going to connect the older generation, the more entrenched Burlingtonians, with the new populations coming in seeking housing. This is really, really great stuff. The only thing I can offer at this point, other than my thanks and gratitude, because I know the job that you all have to do is often thankless, and I mean it from the heart. I appreciate what y'all are doing, and I encourage you to remain steadfast and stay together on this. I've lived downtown for a year now, sold my car, haven't looked back. There's no more driving, ever. So if you wanted to make it even better than just the ADU stuff, you could do fare, free public transit, and that would make my life awesome.
All right, thank you.
President Wright, sorry, I had not signed up, and I wasn't sure if what I was going to present would be a part of our presentation, but if it's okay, I would do it at public comment.
Okay,
Do you want to speak to?
but make sure you pull the microphones in really close.
Hi, Liz Curry, Ward 3 School Commissioner. So it just came to our attention when, at a Ward 2-3 NPA meeting, when Max Tracy was presenting on the moving the ballot language due date, it came to our attention that it was under consideration to include the March ballot language as well as the November ballot language, and moving the March ballot language due date earlier would make the school budget process even more constrained because we get critical data from the state too late to work with that earlier January date. So we have a
wanted to go
request.
on record, just that on behalf of the Burlington School Board of Commissioners, we request not moving the ballot language due date for the March ballot, as it would constrain the Burlington School Board and district's budgeting process even more due to lack of critical city and Vermont state data. We request that City Council please draft a City Council resolution for a potential change in only the November ballot language due date. The reason being is that the state of Vermont does not print ballots for town meeting day, so there would not be a problem in leaving the March ballot language due date alone. Does that make sense?
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take that under consideration. Our final speaker is Rojil Eddings. Rajil? Rajneet. Come on up, sir. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. I hope I'm at the correct meeting. This is the Burlington School District Board meeting, correct?
This is the Burlington City Council meeting.
Oh, see, that was my mistake.
They're meeting, though. They are meeting.
They're meeting outside. All right, here we go. With that, I have nobody else signed up, so we will close the public forum for this evening and move to the consent agenda. Councilor Busher.
Yes, I'd like to move to waive the reading and adopt the agenda as presented with one notation that item 5.15 is a resolution that Councilor Pine abstained from at the Board of Finance due to a conflict of interest. So I don't know if that is adequate or whether we need to separate the question. And the city attorney is talking to the mayor, so I will pause to see.
Do you have an answer for us, City Attorney Blackwood?
So I will repeat this. So the consent agenda includes the resolution that Councilor Pine had to abstain from at the Board of Finance. I noted it as such, or do we need to separate that? Do we need to divide the consent agenda and act on that separately?
I think as long as you note that Councilor Pine is recused from that particular item, that can be noted in the minutes.
Okay, so if that's so noted.
So noted.
Then I've moved the consent agenda, as I said.
Consent agenda item moved by Councilor Busher, seconded by Councilor Roof. All those in favor of the consent agenda passage, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. We are now going to recess the regular city council meeting to convene the Liquor Control Commission, recessing at 7:59. And now I will recognize Commissioner Roof for the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. I will move to adopt the agenda.
Moved by Commissioner Roof, seconded by Councilor Tracy. All those in favor of adoption of the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have the agenda. Item number 2 is the consent agenda. Commissioner Roof.
I'll move to adopt the agenda, taking the actions as indicated.
Moved by Councilor Roof, seconded by Councilor Tracy. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please, of a passage of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Item number 3.01, Commissioner Roof.
Thank you. I'll move 3.01, approval of a 2020-2021 first-class and third-class liquor license application for the Daily Planet at 15 Center Street with the following conditions. All city permits need to be closed out, contingent upon fire marshal approval with all standard conditions.
Moved by Commissioner Roof, seconded by Commissioner Hanson. Any discussion? Commissioner Busher.
President Wright, the Commissioner Roof raised his hand, which might be germane before I...
Commissioner Roof, did you have...
I was asking for the floor back.
Okay, continue, sure.
Because if you're looking at the agenda, I did leave off a condition, and the city attorney is here to speak to why that condition was struck from the motion, if you'd like to have him up.
Absolutely.
Good evening. The city clerk's office and the city attorney's office asked for a condition that that required the payment of back taxes, the rooms and meals. We've reached an agreement with both the buyer and the seller to the transaction of the sale of the assets, such that that condition can be removed. So while it appeared in your agenda, they've given us a settlement statement for the sale, in which the sale won't go forward without payment to the city. And leaving that condition in would create problems with state licensing. So we're satisfied, and we'd ask to have that dropped from this particular permit.
All right, thank you, Attorney Hassler. Commissioner Busher.
Thank you. That was one of my questions, so thank you very much. But the other thing is, I know this is a liquor license, but I was concerned with the information that was included in the packet regarding the Health Commission rating and also the building inspector. So we don't say anything about the establishment. Is that true? Can I look to, the chair is talking to Lori, but could the city attorney respond to that?
Can the city attorney respond, or does Commissioner Roof want to respond? Did you hear what Commissioner
I
Busher said?
unfortunately didn't. I was something else. What was the question?
Can you respond?
It's new to me that I appeared only on the one issue. I'm not, Adam, do you have some awareness of?
He hasn't. Can you recite the question again,
can.
Councilor Busher?
I
Commissioner
can.
Busher.
I think he's now listening
Wait,
to
hold
someone
on.
else.
Commissioner Roof.
My understanding is that you have concerns over the health inspection and other.
And the building inspection, I mean, neither of those seemed, they seemed to have some issues with both the structure and the health finding. And I just wanted to say, because you're just looking at the license, you really, that's outside your purview. And
Correct.
Is that true?
We did not at the committee discuss anything related to health code. Commissioner Tracy might have a comment on this as well. President
Commissioner
Wright.
Tracy.
Yeah, the other aspect of this, Councilor Busher, is that there is a part of the establishment is changing hands, so it will be under new management. So I would imagine that some of these things that new management would bring into line some of these things that have not been addressed. That's my interpretation. But again, this was not discussed at the committee level, and this is not something that's
That you normally look at.
that we normally look at as part of our permit. We look at sort of the application itself in terms of things like record checks and those kinds of things. So.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Tracy. Commissioner Busher, you all set?
I am, thank
All
you.
right. All set? Everyone, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Commissioner Roof, adjournment?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Roof, seconded by Commissioner Hanson. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Hearing any opposed, that we are adjourned. We will now reconvene the regular city council meeting at 8:05. And back on the deliberative agenda, item 6.01 is a communication from Mayor Weinberger regarding appointment of the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Burlington. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, President Wright. If it is acceptable to you, I'd like to invite Catherine Shad to join us here at the table. I am very excited to be bringing before you tonight Catherine's appointment to be the next Chief Administrative Officer. As the council well knows, the Chief Administrative Officer position is a key position in city government. We've been very fortunate to have strong, excellent Chief Administrative Officers for the last 8 years, and they've played a key role in the city's financial turnaround. The position has been being served quite skillfully on an interim basis by Chief Locke for a couple months now. And I do appreciate the chief's service in these dual roles. I'm hoping, however, we can reassign him back to the firehouse soon and have a permanent CAO in his place. And I think Catherine is an outstanding candidate and will be an excellent CAO. She brings years of experience in international development, monitoring, managing complex budgets, monitoring compliance and financial management systems. She has deep experience in project management, which the council knows is a particular area where the city hopes to continue to improve and innovate. And she also has demonstrated in her 8 years of living in Burlington, of living in Chittenden County, a deep commitment to the community in the area, and including her community role serving as a vice chair of a new place. Mr. President, I think Catherine's going to be a great CAO. I hope she has strong council support tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we'll give you the floor, Ms. Schatz, if you would like to say a few words.
Thank you. Mr. President, I would just like to say that I am honored to be considered for this role. I have spent the last 8 years here in Vermont, really getting to know the city of Burlington, working right up the street at Tetra Tech ARD, and spending a lot of time managing projects overseas, and really feeling a call to be able to serve our community here, close to home. I've been able to do that through a new place, but I'm really looking forward to being able to apply the skills that the mayor mentioned in terms of financial management and project management, things of that nature, and applying them here in this city. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm really looking forward to this new challenge.
All right, thank you very much. We'll turn first to Councilor Roof.
Thank you, President Wright, and thank you for being here and sharing that. I just want to call out my appreciation on top of all the professional experience that is noted in your CV. What I gravitated towards was your work at the A New Place organization. For those that aren't aware, A New Place taking up the low barrier shelter this on relatively short notice this year was a decision that had to be by many people, including the board. And so I think that and beyond demonstrates a level of commitment to this community that I know, for one, I'm very appreciative of, and I look forward to supporting your candidacy tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
Thank you, Councilor Roof. Councilor Zhang.
Thank you, and congratulations for stepping up into this position. And I think Tetra Tech is an amazing organization, doing great work. And I know a lot of the history too, from ARD to Tetra Tech, and the work you do in West Africa, all over the world. So I think it's you changing totally different word, to hear. And what do you think will be the challenges for you, and how also can you utilize the council to help you in this new journey?
These are great questions. I think I have spent the first part of my career, as you can see in my CV, in nonprofit, and then the second part in for-profit. So I thought, why not try local government? But I am well aware that the experiences that I've had in working with local governments, as informative as they may be, are different than the experiences of working day to day in Burlington, simply because I have helped project manage large USAID funded local government projects in countries around the world. I am under no pretense that I understand how things work behind the scenes here. So I understand there's a learning curve, but I'm a quick learner, and I am very excited for that. I am also interested in applying the things that I have learned in all of these various fields to what I bring here and the work that I'll do. I have had the pleasure to meet with some of you in small groups or one-on-one, and so I'm not exactly sure what I need from the council yet, but I really appreciate that question, and I think as I settle in over these next couple of months, I will have a better idea. But I am sure that at various times I will call on all of you with questions and for various needs of support, but I trust that you will do the same. I understand that this is a position where you will come to me with various questions on the budget and probably other things, and so I hope that that's a relationship that really goes both ways, and that you'll feel free to call on me if there's more things that I could be doing for you as well. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very tricky question.
Yes.
And you answered it beautifully.
Thank you.
Because what I was looking for is for us to come to you, that invitation. Thank you, and I can say congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Zhang. And Councilor Tracy, my apologies. You were actually next in the queue, and I blew it. So you have the floor now, Councilor Tracy.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for being here tonight and for being willing to take on this big role. I'm sure they've told you about this thing that I have about department heads living in Burlington, and it speaks nothing to your qualifications or anything about you as an individual, but out of fairness and what I've sort of done across the board is that if someone is not living in Burlington, I haven't supported them, and so that's really the only reason. I really, I understand that that's probably difficult when you're in this role, and so I just want to state that, I really look forward to working with you. I think you'll be a great CAO, but out of fairness, I just really want to be sure that I hold myself to that line. So I'm not going to vote for you tonight, but that's not a judgment on your character. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Councilor Paul.
Thank you. And thank you, Catherine, for being here tonight and for the great answers that you've given to a number of questions. There may actually be others that that are in the queue. Are there? No. Then I would make a motion to confirm the appointment of Catherine Shedd as the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Burlington.
Moved by Councilor Paul, seconded by Councilor Roof. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, let's have the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. So the vote is 11-1. Clerk has Councilor Tracy on record as the one no. Congratulations, and we look forward to working with you. Item 6.02 has been removed and will reappear on the next agenda. Item 6.03, an indoor entertainment permit application. Councilor Roof.
Thank you, President Wright. I'll move 603, approval of a 2020-2021 indoor entertainment permit application for the Daily Planet at 15 Center Street with the following conditions. All city permits need to be closed out, contingent upon fire marshal approval with all standard conditions.
Moved by Councilor Roof, second by Councilor Hanson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Item number 6.04, it's public hearings on the proposed charter changes for the annual town meeting day on March 3rd. So Councilor Tracy.
I just wanted to ask the city attorney, President Wright, if I may, a question.
Certainly.
City Attorney Blackwood, we had some school commissioners come here and enter and share some comments about a charter change. I'm wondering if we might be able to get those entered into the record in some form or fashion, such that we'll be able to make adjustments or be responsive to the concerns that they raised.
Yes, what we had planned to do was actually to have me speak in this public hearing and to propose what we were thinking about, what we believe a solution to be, so that we could go ahead and perhaps get started on a draft and get that circulating to the school commissioners and anyone and all of you as well. And that is that it seems that the conflict primarily would occur around when the state is coming up with the numbers for budgets, and I think that's what I understand the primary concern to be, and that would be happening only in the beginning of the calendar year before the March elections, so that if we left the deadlines the way they are for the March election, there is no state or federal election that virtually ever coincides with that annual city meeting. And so if what we do is leave those alone but focus only on changing the timelines for when there is also a state or federal election possible, which means any other elections, I think that will meet the school department's goals. In looking at that, we believe that there's a fairly simple change to what is proposed. The mayor has been asking me a question that I had started to talk to him about earlier about the federal primaries. And I mean, my sense is that what we're saying is we will have longer deadlines for all elections other than the annual town meeting, because that's the only one that seems to have a conflict with the education tax issue, getting the numbers from the state on education tax. I believe that's the only objection that was raised by the school commissioners about the timeline, not that any other election, any other time of year would be a problem. Does anybody, does anybody think I'm misunderstanding what the school commissioners have asked for? So that would be the proposal. It's a fairly simple change in the language, I believe, that will essentially leave the deadlines as they are for the annual town meeting in March, and otherwise we'll change the deadlines as proposed.
Councillor Tracy, anything further on that?
So if I'm correct, what you're suggesting is that you would prepare language that would be shared then with the councilor that would come out, for instance, like on Thursday, like our normal agenda was, and then we'd vote on that on Monday with the appropriate changes?
Correct.
Okay.
And we would get it circulated to you. You know, we'll try to get it out tomorrow if that solution seems reasonable to everybody. I guess I should make clear, in the proposed changes, what it would change is only when the ballots are made available. We would probably, unless you all think we should change them, the times for petitions and candidates could stay the same as they are proposed. And the only change would be that we would not be finalizing the ballot early.
And the deadline for all these charter changes going on the ballot is our next meeting.
Correct. You've got another public hearing at the next meeting, but you've got to vote on the changes following that.
We have to vote on changes in the following meeting next Monday.
Correct. Like in the same meeting as your second public hearing.
Councillor Hanson and then Councillor Mason.
I just had a clarifying question. So for the presidential primary elections then every 4 years, so for those we would still have this issue of the timing not working out and the separate mailings. And I think...
No, what I'm proposing is that we go ahead and shorten the time frames so that we're not doing the separate mailings in those elections. We fixed the problem for those elections. It's the only issue raised by the school commissioners has to do with just the March election. And there's not a state or federal election then, so we can have the longer period and have the ballots available for a shorter time.
I don't know. No. Primary's in March.
Point.
Okay.
Did you have a point of order, Councilor Polino? No. Okay.
I had a point. I was going to say a point of information, actually. Okay. I'm unclear what the school board's commissioner's objection is. In other words, is it not workable, or is it that it's business as usual won't be able to be done?
Councillor Tracy was just reminding me that we have public hearings on each one of these items. So we really should go to the public hearing on each one, and we can discuss going. Did you want to make another comment first, Councillor Mason? Councillor Tracy?
Yeah, just that it's important in the context of the public hearings that Attorney Blackwood made this comment. This allows us the ability, as part of the charter change process, to go through the changes, and then we can work through, those of you who do have questions can work through those changes over the course of this week. Hopefully, at next week's meeting, we'll be able to have further clarity and have it more fully explained, but I'd prefer to, if anyone from the public has anything else to offer.
Right, because changes need to be based on comments that we hear tonight.
Right, exactly, but I think what we've heard is that Attorney Blackwood would, so thank you.
Okay, so are we ready to open the public hearing?
Just the mayor finally got through my thick head as to what he was saying before, so I think, and I think it's what Councillor Hanson is saying. So yes, we will have to change it. We will have to send out 2 ballots for the federal primary in every 4 years when it happens in March.
Timing issue will remain for that, right?
Correct. We won't be able to correct the timing issue for that one election.
You opened the public hearing.
Okay, so we're going to open the public hearing up for all of the charter changes now. And so if anyone would like to speak on any of the charter changes, and I think someone should give a brief review of all the charter changes. Councillor Tracy, would you like to give a review of?
Councillor Pine has offered to give the Housing Trust Fund, given his long time serving the city in the context of CETO, and then I'll do the other two.
Okay, so give us a brief synopsis of this one.
Sure. The proposed language for the Housing Trust Fund is to essentially restore an existing levy, although it's not a dedicated tax in the charter. So we are basically creating a dedicated tax, and we are restoring it to a full penny, which is what the voters approved when it was initially approved in March of 1989. The idea here is that it also will then increase with the city's growth in grand list value over time, so it will essentially keep up with inflation. I just wanted to lay that out because I think that's one thing. The other thing is people should just know that this is the city's, I think it's fair to say, the city's only local tax dollars that are used specifically in support, providing financial support to both create and preserve permanently affordable housing. So this is where the city leverages other dollars from state, federal government, and private sources to create homes for low and very low income residents.
All right, thank you, Councillor Pine. Councillor Tracy, you'll take the other two.
Yeah, so the first one is the changes to the availability of the dates for petitions, warnings, and ballot availability. That one was the one that we were just discussing, and the confusion was around the issue that was highlighted was around the numbers for the school budget not being finalized in the timeframes that are outlined in the resolution when it comes to some of the town meeting elections. But basically, when there's a state and a city ballot available, the state ballot becomes available 45 days prior to the election, and then the city ballot becomes available 28 days prior. What that results in is that if someone requests an absentee ballot prior to the city ballot being available, they're first sent a state ballot, and then they're sent a city ballot after the fact, after that. What many people do or have done is that they'll complete the state ballot and then not complete or return the city ballot. So we don't get their full, the full benefit of their whole votes in those cases. And so what this proposes to do is to match the timeline of the city ballot in those cases with the state ballot, so it becomes available earlier, and that was what created that conflict that the school board highlighted, and that we're working on remedying. So this gives you, this would mean that the state and city ballots would arrive at the same time, and folks would they would be available for, the city ballot would be available for more time. One of the things that we do have to be aware of, though, is that in finalizing any of those city ballots, it does require us to be aware of that deadline and have our act together essentially a couple weeks sooner than that. It also means that for petitions and other things, that those would have to be ready or completed prior to that. So if folks are petitioning for things, but the reality is that this gives folks more time to receive those, and it also resolves that issue of people getting one ballot, sending it in, and then thinking they've done their duty, and then not sending in the second ballot, or forgetting to send it in, or whatever it might be. So we're hoping that this will result in higher return rates for both ballots, both city and state issues, and giving folks and reducing the confusion around those. And then the second, the last charter change has to do with voting for folks with permanent resident status or green card status in the city of Burlington. So what this charter change would allow is for folks with that status to participate in local elections. So basically to vote on city races, school budget, those kinds of issues during town meeting day, or should they arise at other times to participate at that point. These are folks who would have to have, again, a permanent resident or green card status in order to be considered eligible to vote in those elections. And the folks that would, and in our committee discussions, we talked about concerns around privacy and potential and those kinds of issues, but in terms of like the federal government having access to this information. But because we're using federal or permanent residents as part of this, or as those being eligible for this, the federal government would already have that information as it is. So that concern was allayed in that committee process. As part of that process, we had also checked in with the ACLU and Migrant Justice, both of whom were okay with this change. And prior to that, I spoke, and I also understand that Councilor Roof has done quite a bit of outreach from folks who might be impacted by this, as well as additional organizations, and that he felt like that those organizations were also supportive. So that's that charter change as well.
All right, thank you, Councilor Tracy. So we are all set with the public hearings now. Would any member of the public like to speak on any of the proposed charter changes? Come on up. And just identify yourself for the record and then tell us what you have to tell us.
Sure. My name's Nate Lantieri. I'm a Ward 5 resident.
Alex Levine, Ward 3.
So we just would like to bring up a question of the language, in particular to the clause non-citizen voting with regards to that charter change. It's a really important question, and we'd just like to make sure that the intention of that question is accurately reflected in the language. So thank you all. I hope that that will be considered by the council.
He was so efficient and quick. I'll waste some time. It'll be quick, don't worry. I might not make it back for the subsequent discussion that you all are going to have, but I really appreciate that we open up this discussion seriously next time. America's a special place. You don't have to be a certain skin color to be an American. You really don't even have to be a proper citizen if you really look around. There are a lot of people who are, at least formally speaking, not citizens, but they do a lot of labor. They raise some good kids. They keep their noses clean. They make a daily political decision to take part in the United States of America. And it's not easy out here. I'm not going to lie to you. It's easier here than it is in El Salvador, but it's not easy. And keeping your nose clean and doing the work and being a legitimate part of the community, which we know a lot of non-citizens are here in Burlington and parts beyond, is something that deserves to be honored. Too few of us vote. The ones that do the work, the ones that make the political decision to take part in the United States of America, they deserve a shot. And just as a little thing, I mean, we're in the process of trying to deny the natural-born, inalienable right of citizenship to people born in the United States. That's what the DACA controversy is around. So until we can get a real handle on the formalism of citizenship law in the United States, we need to start to dilate our notion of what a real citizen is. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Just a point of information, if I could.
1 second.
Okay.
I don't understand.
Councilor Pine.
Point of information is if a counselor has a concern, do we take that table? Are we able to do that if it hasn't been raised? Are we permitted to do that?
You mean to
Public
get a concern on the record? I think that we can state it. I mean, City Attorney Blackwood, if a city councilor wants to raise a concern about one of the charter change so that it's on the record, so it can be taken under consideration before we act on them at the next meeting, do they need to be here, or can they speak at the? This is a public hearing for the public, but.
It's a public hearing, but I think that if you recognize a city councilor to speak, they can do it. If they are here, maybe it's a little clearer if they come over here, but I don't have any problem with their speaking.
Take a seat, Councilor Pine. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome to tonight's city council meeting.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it under 3 minutes here.
Pull the microphone right in, sir.
Brian Pine, Ward 3, Crowley Street. The question regarding the changing of dates is very important to our school district because the tax department does not provide the data on common level of appraisal that allows us to set our tax rate until well into the late fall. And so if we change the March date, for submission, we would probably run up against a point where they couldn't do their job of coming forward with the tax rate proposal. So that's really a significant issue. I would also point out that I think exempting March from this change entirely would make a lot of sense. In other words, why would we have deadlines for submission when in fact the ballots are still going to be on the current schedule? So I think we just should be aware of that. I would also point out that the question regarding voting rights for permanent residents, calling it non-citizens has created confusion among my constituents. I've had friends ask me, wow, are you really extending the voting rights to people who are illegally here in the United States? That's the worst thing that can happen because that is exactly what we're not doing. So I think we'd be better served by putting something along the lines of permanent resident voting or something not saying non-citizen, because non-citizen causes confusion for many people. And I'm just expressing it because people who I know, who I thought would know the difference, have asked me what we're doing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilor Pine. So those concerns are on the record now. Councilor Jang?
It's also not permanent resident. It just says it's a legal resident. No, that's...
Welcome, Councilor Jang.
Thank you, President Wright. Thank you, councilors, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to, talk about this issue about the non-citizen voting. I think based on some comments that we heard just right here, we are talking about people who are legally here, green card holders, right? Having a green card, this means what we have in front of us. It means that anybody who has a green card from all over the United States can come here to Burlington and vote. That's what it really, really means. We're talking about federal government program that we want to tailor down to our local municipality. There is no way of vetting people if they're resident of here. In order for people to get residency, you have to live here 12 months. But what is in front of us? You come tomorrow and you go vote for a school board. You don't know what's going on in this community. That's a big problem. Oh yeah, if there are things that you guys talked about that's not clear, let's talk about it now before this goes to the ballot. That's one thing. I think the other important thing, we are putting this in front of us for the voters of Burlington, and those who are affected. Many people are talking about, they looked at it. I heard ACLU, I heard migrant justice, but we are talking about people with their green card, who are green card holders, who live here. They do not want to show up in the voting booths for security reasons. It's not that you have a green card that you will get citizenship. What people want is to become citizen of this great nation. And should we not think about putting them in jeopardy by bringing them on voting booths? And the other important thing too is nobody knows who's citizen and who's not until you are a federal agent. You can know who's citizen and who's not. But now you're letting everybody in the community know, make the distinction. These people are citizens, this is their ballot. These people are not citizens. I think I am an immigrant. I went through the immigration process. I was a green card holder. Now I gave up all my nationalities to become American citizen. We're looking for a reward, and that reward should not be taken away. Before we put things, let's really talk meaningfully to people that this affects. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilor Jang. And remember, these are all going to be voted on at the next meeting. So everybody doesn't now need to say why they oppose or support one of them. It's only if you have a concern that you want the committee to address or it to be addressed as a potential change. Councillor Busher?
Yes, I don't want to take a seat over there. I have a question about one of the charter changes.
All right.
Okay. So if the president would allow me
I
to
allow
ask the
you.
question. Okay. So in an attempt to make things clear regarding the change to local election dates, I find this now so muddy, I don't understand it at all. So in anticipation of the revision that I hear the city attorney potentially making to this charter change, I have some questions about if we were to involve March in this change, what would that mean for charter changes as far as their deadlines? I just couldn't follow this all here. I just didn't understand it when every 4 years there might be a presidential primary, what that meant for all of the deadlines, for any question, any charter change, because I had some concerns about moving all of that timeline up. But I don't know the answer to these questions. I now heard another counselor say that maybe we should leave the deadline for March as is. So with the acknowledgement that now and again there would be two ballots, ballots. And I think that I'm just going to state that on lines 20 and 21 of this resolution, it talks about opportunities to allow local questions to be printed on the backside of the state general election ballot. If indeed the non-citizen voting goes forward, you wouldn't be able to do that because you'd have to separate out those two populations. So those are my comments, and I look forward to really better understanding what we're proposing and how we're going to seize the opportunity to make more sense out of this for the department, but also give clarity to those of us who are trying to understand what the timelines are for various items.
Okay. City Attorney Blackwood, do you have
Yeah.
do you have a response to that?
I mean, I think what I was proposing is that the March election continue with the existing timelines. We could, and you could either make that on everything, or you could say just that the ballots wouldn't be printed. And I heard people saying on everything makes probably more sense to leave the March election as is and to change the deadlines only on other elections.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Busher. Councillor Mason.
I have a question also for the city attorney based on public comment that I've heard. There was a statement made about the residency requirement and someone moving here. Am I correct that the residency requirement for a non-citizen is no different than?
You are correct.
Okay, so.
There is no one-year requirement to reside.
I did not think so, but I was
be a voter.
hoping. And then I also heard reference to permanent, potentially changing permanent to, permanent resident as opposed to non-citizen. I think it falls into the same category. We have no requirement of permanency. If I show up the day before and I've moved to Burlington and have my utility bill, I am eligible to register to vote and vote.
If you look in the proposal here,
Yeah.
the definition of who is a non-citizen that falls within the category here is someone who is a legal resident of the United States means any non-citizen who resides in the United States on a permanent or indefinite basis in compliance with federal immigration laws. And we took that language from, which I think is where people are getting the permanent idea, is that for non-citizens, they have to be recognized under a category of either permanent or indefinite residency to be a legal resident of the United States. And Councillor Roof was asking me a question about whether or not people here on a work visa, for example, and I can't say I know all of the different kinds of work visas there are, but my understanding is most of them have some form of limited time frame, so those folks might not fit under this definition.
So to be clear, the permanency requirement under the definition, though, is the United States, not the city of Burlington.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mason. Councilor Polino, did you still want to speak?
I'll just be quick. So it piggybacks on what Chip was saying, but it's an objection to try to strike, even more specifically, the term non-citizen, because I think as much as the media has reported on this and accurately portrayed what it is, I think people are interpreting it still broader than what it really is. And I wonder if the paragraph itself, like you just explained, is clear. Why can't we come up with a title that's clear but doesn't make this new requirement like you have to be a legal resident, or, you know, or even though you do, it's not saying like it's like a prerequisite to voting, but.
I mean, I suppose the title right now of this section reads requirements for non-citizen voters. I suppose we could say requirements for voters who are legal residents but not citizens. Yes. We could say something like that if that seems clearer to people.
Okay. All right, Councilor Tracy.
I just want to be clear that even though the definition of permanence is one that's a federal definition, there is further clarity that's provided around eligibility in this charter change, meaning that the person, like everyone else, would have to be at least 18 years of age, would have to take the voter's oath, and would have to reside in the city of Burlington, and would have to register by the same deadlines as everyone else. So it's just important to emphasize those couple of points, because I don't want us to get confused about that, and that's really what's stated there.
All right, thank you, Councilor Tracy. So, City Attorney Blackwood, you will be working on language to address those concerns.
I will.
All right, thank you. Any all set? So we opened the public hearings. We heard from the public. We heard from councilors' concerns. And so I am going to close the public forum for all these items now. And we will have the final public forum will be at the next city council meeting. We will be acting on all these next Monday. So that brings us to item number 6.08, which is an ordinance offenses and miscellaneous provisions, express prohibitions regarding leaf blowers. Councilor Paul.
Thank you very much, President Wright. I'd like to move the ordinance, waive the reading, and ask for the floor back after a second, please.
Seconded by Councilor Hanson. Councilor Paul, you have the floor back.
Thank you very much. So as most of us know, for large areas and for residents for whom raking is challenging, for landscaping companies, and as well for the city of Burlington, and for the most part, they are used in the fall when all those colorful leaves that we have fallen off the trees. Leaf blowers are an efficient way to address leaf accumulation. They're efficient and they're strong. That efficiency does come at a cost, and there are unintended consequences to the use of this equipment. I was actually surprised when I was doing research on this to find out just how detrimental leaf blowers are to the environment. There was a Wall Street Journal article in 2017 that stated that operating a commercial leaf blower for an hour emits more pollution than driving a Toyota Camry for 1,100 miles, which seemed to me a pretty striking statistic. Not only are they harmful to the environment, they also are very noisy. And some of that noise is due to their engine configuration, but for many residents, that is something that impedes their quality of life. The ordinance that we have before us was modeled after an ordinance a similar ordinance from Newton, Massachusetts, which is a city similar in some ways to us in terms of demographics and being in New England, where there's lots of leaves. There are about 100 communities in the country, most of them in New England and in the Northeast, that have some restrictions on the use of leaf blowers. Just to clarify, especially for people that are watching, this ordinance is not about banning leaf blowers. What this ordinance would do, and of course this is only a first read, would restrict the use of gas-powered leaf blowers to the time of the year when they're needed most. In other words, they are needed most in the fall. In the summer, between Memorial Day and Labor Day, we would restrict the use of leaf blowers that are battery and electric powered, thereby furthering the well-being of the city by reducing noise when most people are outside enjoying the summer, and as well as reducing carbon emissions. You know, in time, just as we have seen with cars and electric vehicles, these blowers are becoming stronger and they're more efficient. And in time, you know, hopefully there'll be no need for an ordinance like this because all leaf blowers will be electric. But for now, this ordinance is important in that it would be one way for the city to reduce our carbon footprint. Because electric and battery operated leaf blowers don't have the same power and efficiency that gas powered leaf blowers do, it's for that reason, and just being realistic and appreciating the nature of leaves, that during the fall, more high-powered leaf blowers are needed. So the other thing I also wanted to mention for those who have a leaf blower is that the ordinance language also appreciates that there's a cost to purchasing a new leaf blower. And especially for the city of Burlington, we have many leaf blowers, and so there's a cost to that to replace them for the use in the summer. The ordinance phases in the employment of these leaf blowers. City departments who arguably should be leading the way would abide by the ordinance beginning in July of 2021, and then there's a phase-in for property owners, landscape companies, and individual property owners. I just wanted to also mention that in crafting this ordinance, that we did reach out to affected city departments about 2 months ago to gather input and appreciated their comments. Many of them were incorporated into this ordinance. Still, I think it's fair to say that some comments and concerns definitely remain, and it's my hope that the committee, the ordinance committee, when you're able to get to this, will work through those and come back to the council soon with an ordinance for a second reading. In closing, I'd just like to add that this is part of the carbon footprint, the net zero energy that we have all, that most of us voted in favor of. And I think it's important that we begin to proactively walk our talk in taking on the climate emergency. This is not easy. This kind of change is not easy for all people who use this equipment. And in some communities that have enacted the change, there has been an adjustment period. But I don't think that's a reason not to try. And I hope that this will be the first step in finding a way to make this equipment not part of the problem, but actually part of the solution. I'd just like to thank Attorney Blackwood for all the time that you've spent with me on this ordinance, and also Councilors Hanson and Shannon for co-sponsoring. I hope we can unanimously move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Paul. And remember, this is first reading, beginning of the process only, so this is a motion to refer it to the Ordinance Committee for further work. Ready for the vote? All those in, Councilor Mason.
Sorry. I thought there would be more in the queue. I will be supporting sending this to Ordinance Committee, but I want to just set expectations on timing before the council. This council has directed the Ordinance Committee to spend significant amount of time working through the housing reform provisions. We are doing so up until town meeting day. There are other, I know some of you reached out to me, there are other matters in the queue in ordinance. So I just want to be realistic. We will treat this with all seriousness and as expeditiously, but it may be a different ordinance committee by the time we get to this. So that's not changing my support. I just want everyone to be aware of timing issues. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that, I think we're ready to vote. And I'll just say I have concerns about this, but I'm voting yes to move forward. All those in favor of moving this forward to the Ordinance Committee, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. Councilor Paulino votes no. So the vote is 11-1 to send it to the Ordinance Committee, to refer it to the Ordinance Committee for further evaluation and work. 6.09 is a resolution for the annual city meeting, and that's the increase in public safety tax rate for fire and police. Councilor Pine.
Thank you, President Wright. I would move to adopt the resolution and request a floor back after the second.
Moved by Councilor Pine, seconded by Councilor Busher. Councilor Pine.
I think we've all heard loud and clear the need and the justification for increasing our spending on public safety. Approximately 80% of the calls that are generated by residents of the North End to our fire department are ambulance-related calls. There is no ambulance service and there are no staff people. If there were an ambulance, it would be parked because there aren't enough people to operate the ambulance. So we, I believe, are taking a step here to increase public safety for residents of about a quarter, a little over a quarter of whom live, our Burlington residents live in the New North End. So this is really an important piece. It's not just for the New North End, though, because it's important to acknowledge that when we have more staff at a safe staffing levels, I should say, and we have an additional piece of equipment that can save lives, it benefits the entire city because it's a system, a fire service system that delivers those services. I think it's also important to point out that we are mindful of the fact that this is a tax increase. This is a tax increase that will be paid by every property taxpayer in Burlington. There's no income sensitivity to the municipal portion of people's taxes. I know that's a struggle for folks. I know I don't take it lightly at all, and I think none of us should take it lightly. We should always remember the taxpayer that struggles to pay their bills when we weigh these decisions. And I personally have weighed it and come to the conclusion that what we gain in public safety benefit is worth it, and I hope that majority of councilors will support that, and I believe that our voters will back us up on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Open it up to the City Council. Councilor Busher, you're first.
Thank you. As was stated, this was discussed tonight and prior to tonight at the Board of Finance. As we looked at what was necessary and initially started out with a 4-cent public safety tax and worked at, the Board of Finance didn't, we just gave our input, but the administration and the fire chief worked using two hats here, helped to change this to be a 3-cent increase. I just wanted to state that currently, so it was, how many years ago, 20 years ago, that we got the second ambulance? And at that point, we couldn't do it with one ambulance, and we were dependent on other communities and other agencies. So we had 2 ambulances, and we were okay, but we still needed those other agencies and communities. Now we're at a point where we still need all of them, but sometimes there's nobody to meet the need, as I learned from the fire chief on past Friday. And so really, we've got the ambulance, but now we have to staff it. And so this dedicated tax, and it's important for people who are going door to door to know it's a dedicated tax, public safety tax, to deal with staffing this 3rd ambulance that happens to be housed in the New North End, but is for the entire community. And so I really tried to figure out how to reduce this 3 cents. Not that I have divine wisdom, but I tried to figure it out with the fire chief to see if there was another way to staff it so that we could reduce that tax even further. I had some ideas which didn't resonate because, first of all, I'm not part of the department, the fire department, but it would have been staffing within the fire department, and there's no mystery. I wanted to know if we could have done it with EMTs as opposed to adding 9 additional firefighters. That doesn't seem possible at this point, but I certainly have asked the administration and the fire department to consider, to continue to look at staffing these ambulances. Having done as much as I could, I'm concerned about asking the public for a tax increase. I want to be really clear, but I also don't want to preclude or eliminate this option from the public, to let them say, yes, we want this, we want to spend our dollars this way, or no, we don't. I think the mayor has, I think the important thing for people to know is if we don't get this tax increase, that it will be difficult to figure out how to make up those dollars. That is something that's real, and there was a proposal in the mayor's communication that suggested some ways we could look at achieving some savings, but they're easy to pluck from any department. They've really done the best they could. And so I am supporting this, but I just wanted you all to know my reservations, but my support to the community about their need for safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. Councilor Roof, then Mason, then Hanson.
Thank you, President Wright. I just wanted to...
Tracy.
Not sure how that happens, but I just wanted to say that I'll be enthusiastically supporting this ballot question. I think that one of the most important things that government does, especially local government, is to provide emergency response, public safety services to our community. And I think that we've heard from our team at the fire department that this is a need that needs to be met. And we found a way to do so in the most frugal way. This is not, from my perspective, and I appreciate the work of the Board of Finance and the administration on this. This is as close to as tight of a budget to make these services available without any frills on top. So I think that's how we should be moving forward with something like this. We can be confident that the team will be growing by 9 full-time staff members, which I know I'm excited about to see that team grow at our fire department. And so I just want to go on record saying that in addition to some other campaigns, I'll be certainly working to support this one in front of the voters on March 3rd. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Roof. Councilor Tracy.
Thank you, President Wright. I will also be supporting this charter change because I certainly see the need for it in the new North End, but I also see a benefit for the residents of the old North End in the sense that our fire station, that the ambulances out of the old North End fire station currently serves the new North End, which means that, of course, can't be in the 2 places at once and can't be in the old North End serving our residents. So, and there's also sort of the other impact of having that that ambulance blaring up the avenue. This kind of hopefully will minimize the need for that to be taking place. So I see a number of benefits for Old North End residents in this, even though it will be housed there. So I think it's important to highlight the real benefit to that neighborhood as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Councilor Hanson.
Thank you. I will be supporting putting this on the ballot and definitely appreciate the need. I did want to raise the fact that I feel that there hasn't been a huge amount of opportunity or venue for engagement outside of the Board of Finance, considering the gravity of the issue or the importance of the issue, and just wanted to flag that. And we are 6 weeks out from election, and so I want to, I guess, understand if anyone wants to speak to it in terms of plans for public engagement over these 6 weeks to help folks understand this need and what the tax impacts are. I'll certainly be doing outreach to my constituents on it. I think it's really important. Curious to hear if there's any public meetings or anything of that sort set up. It's an open question if anyone wants to speak to it. But yeah, I will be supporting this. I just think it would have been better to have some further opportunities for engagement or more public dialogue about this sooner in the process. But definitely appreciate the need and we'll support it.
Thank you, Councilor Hanson. Councilor Polino.
I'll just try to be brief, but there were, as I understand it, 3 Board of Finance meetings with this item on it, which are obviously public, but I understand Councilor Hanson's point. There's, this is a tax increase. Nobody wants the increase. It's a tough time to be asking for a tax increase. It's a substantial increase. But I think we do a lot of cool things here, and I think one of the best things we could say to our constituents is, how cool would it be if this item passes, whatever items, it's going to be item 3, 4. We're going to have 2 more firefighters at all times. Every large-scale incident in the city will now have 2 more bodies available to respond to it. We're going to dedicate $120,000 a year for paramedics, for more firefighters to be paramedics, to administer medication, to on scene, to treat them, to create documentation so that person could go to their primary the next day and have a list of things. So calls for service are changing. There's a 30% increase in the last 10 years. The way we treat people, much like policing, is changing, and I think that's we're being proactive. The way I see this is a policy decision. We're not waiting on public safety. We're not waiting for things to fail to fix it. We're being proactive. We're saying, looking forward, we want to continue this pattern of where you guys have the luxury to spend time with people, and I think that's why it's important for me. And it is 9 positions that are going to be available for the entire city. The ambulance will be in the New North End, but the firefighters are going to go everywhere. So.
Thank you, Councilor Polino. Any other councilor that wants to speak on this? Councilor Jang?
Thank you, President. And I think, to your question, the level of engagement, I think we can ask it differently. What level of concern have come to us about this need, especially in the New North End? Our front porch forums, when I became city council and onward, people been complaining, waiting for 7 minutes. And when it comes to safety, it's like chairs. Every second counts. Every second. So the first time that I got elected, I think my first ask to the mayor was this: how do we make sure that we have an ambulance in the New North End? And he made it clear that you do have one, but it is just that it's not staffed. Met with Chief Locke, same exact thing. And they, made it very clear that it's not that easy. It's complex. We even talked about, okay, how about only 2? They're like, it doesn't work like that. You have to have 3. You have to have also paramedic and all of that. There were also other ideas that came. Instead of 9, let's say 6, so that at night, all the roads are open, ambulances can go back and forth. But they also have requirements that they need to meet that are federal, that are also state. And I think this will be a great, wonderful addition. Because the New North End is a special place. Let's think about it. Not only that I live here, but if you think about it, we have 2 elementary schools. We have 1 middle school. The high school, let's say it's there. Senior centers, I cannot even count. Bridgewood and all of those facilities that we take care of seniors are in the New North End. So every single second counts when it comes to safety. In terms of the public engagement, we will definitely continue as councillors to sell this idea. And I think at the mayor's Wednesday in the New North End, this issue came up, and he answered it beautifully to the people who are there. We never say never, but I think we all have to do our diligence in making sure that the constituent vote for this because their kids live there, or they may end up there when they become old. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jang. Any other councilor who wants to speak on this? Mr. Mayor.
Excuse me, sorry. Thank you, President Wright, and I appreciate the discussion on this so far, and I'm hopeful that, like at the Board of Finance, there is going to be strong support on the council for this initiative. Just to add a couple things for members watching at home and for councilors to think about in the public engagement that follows from now, and I do think I think this is a frequent kind of sensation that was articulated by Councilor Hanson, that the voting starts not that long from now, and the public discussion of the ballot items in some ways doesn't get kicked off until the council acts. So I think we're at a place that we frequently are, where there is some urgency to start these discussions, and I think we know from experience there is time for a fulsome discussion. I certainly will be going to all the MPAs over the next month, as I generally do before town meeting day, going to other public events to get the word out on the ballot items, and the city will be making sure that there is accurate information available on all city outlets for people to find. We can't campaign with city funds, but we can make sure that there's accurate information available through city resources, and other steps will be taken as well. A couple points as for the public tonight and for councilors to consider as you are talking to your constituents about this. I do want to be clear that this formulation of this proposal was made with considerable awareness that we as Burlingtonians face very significant property taxes, and it has been a long a goal of every one of the budgets that I've had to roll in to be very conscious of that and limit property tax increases on voters. And I think we can be confident as we go forward and talk about this that we have succeeded at that to the degree that at least over an 8-year period of time, the property tax increases that go to funding the city operations like fire services have remained below the rate of inflation. And that is the point on that graph on the third page of the memo that is before you, which we are about nearly 4 cents below what the property tax rate would be for the city's operations if it had just simply risen with inflation. We will still be below that figure of inflation over an 8-year period of time if this increase is accepted. That is an important metric, one that I think is worth weighing and considering, because property tax rates, unlike most forms of taxes, I think it's important for the public to understand this, and it's not intuitive. All other major sources of government revenue, income taxes, sales taxes, gross receipts taxes, these consumption taxes, they rise with inflation as a general proposition. Property taxes in our charter are different. They do not rise, the revenues that we receive from them do not rise with inflation in any way unless we take a vote like we are proposing to put before voters at town meeting day. And therefore, if there is not from time to time an affirmative action like this, the city slips farther and farther. Inflation is real, and if our revenues do not rise with inflation, in some ways we're faced with very unwelcome and challenging budget cuts. And I do believe if we're not willing to take this step at this time, that's what we'd be facing in the upcoming budget. So again, I appreciate the support from the Board of Finance for this proposal after a lot of work. I think the Board of Finance discussion helped this and did help us find ways to bring down the total cost. I will be working very hard to make sure the voters of Burlington understand this and hopefully support it on town meeting day.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a closing comment on this, which is this was something that was in our contract negotiations last year as part of our contractual obligation to move this forward. As was said by Councilor Busher, this is going to be something that's used for the entire city. But in terms of the New North End, and I know Councilor Jang mentioned this, but we have Elderwood Senior Care, we have Birchwood Nursing Center, we have Heidelberg Senior Housing, we have Ethan Allen Residence. There are a lot of needs in the New North End. I do hope that the council going forward considers everything that we do in terms of the taxpayers and the affordability issue in the city of Burlington, because it is real. And I think that we need to really focus on core spending issues in the city of Burlington right now. And we are not going to be doing we're not going to be able, in my opinion, to do everything that everyone wants to do because the taxpayers simply can't afford it. But I do think this is a core city function, and I will be supporting it. With that, All those in favor of this public safety tax going on the ballot, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes unanimously. Item 6.10 is a resolution studying an expansion of fare-free transit. Councilor Hanson.
Thank you. I move to waive the reading and adopt the resolution and ask for the floor back after a second.
Seconded by Councilor Pine.
Great, thank you. So several months ago, as noted by Councilor Paul, several months ago we did declare climate emergency. We did commit to trying to get off of fossil fuels in major sectors of fossil fuel use in the city by 2030. I feel that we're already falling behind in this effort, and I feel that it's going to take a lot more of a proactive push to change the status quo, especially in our transportation sector, if we're going to have a shot of actually realizing those ambitious goals and those necessary goals that we've set out. So I think we need to be constantly exploring ways to increase the pace at which we are working towards those goals. I look forward to the report at our next meeting to have some understanding of where we are at so far and what we've set up institutionally within our city government to reduce emissions in terms of our own operations as a city. I think that'll be critical, and that'll help set the tone for the rest of the city. We also need to be driving forward with policies across the board that'll help accelerate the transition more broadly as well. So one of those that I've done a lot of thinking about is in transportation. And this has been a broader discussion around fare-free transportation. It's something that I know Councilor Freeman had campaigned heavily on last year. It's something that has taken off. It's been adopted in several major cities, as noted in the resolution, and it's under discussion in a much greater number of cities as well. It's not a silver bullet by any means, but I think it's an important tool within the suite of tools that we can enact here at the local level, and I think we've seen success with it already with the current, the College Street, formerly the College Street Shuttle, now the Purple Line of GMT, which is fare-free and has been for almost 30 years. So this is similar to the last resolution I brought around transportation issues and how we spend money on transportation. This is an exploration initially. I certainly intend to, based on what we find from this, to try to move forward with policy, but what I'm proposing right now is just to gain more information that can help inform that debate going forward. So I hope that we can all support the gathering of more information. And this has been a discussion in the Transportation Energy Utilities Committee, and as well as with the administration and with Director Spencer too, as well. So I don't know if Director Spencer wants to speak or anyone from the administration, but for myself, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hanson. Councilor Busher?
Yes, I'll be supporting this, but I did have, so this is definitely an initiative that I think is regional and not just Burlington. And so the lines 35 through 39 are really important, that we look at GMT and we look at Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, because I really feel that the goal is one I think we all share, because we need to increase ridership and we need to make this work so that people leave their car at home. And I'm with you on that. But I do think that it gets very problematic if we have systems like the College Street Shuttle where it's free only within Burlington's boundaries, and I think it gets really convoluted for everyone. Some of the efficiencies that you talk about not delaying because people won't have to pay. won't be realized in entirety because they couldn't get rid of all of the apparatus, because once they're outside of Burlington, they'd have to have all of that. So I'm hopeful that, I heard that Anthony Polino was going to introduce something that looked like there might be, he's proposing some approach that would potentially tax people over $200,000 and would potentially, this hasn't made its way through the legislature, but it could be a source of funding for public transportation and climate issues. And so I think we do need to get that information, and we need to figure out where. I know Councilor Hansen has some ideas. I'm not always in support of all of the ideas he has, but some of them I am supportive of. I'll just be honest, no surprise. But I would like to know, President Wright, if Councilor Hansen could email the rest of the council, if they're interested, about how advanced transit in the Upper Valley has made that work. I think that would be incredibly informative because I don't know enough about it. So that's my request, and as I said, I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Councilor Hansen, you can provide the council with more information on that?
Absolutely, and I can get in the normal queue as well. Or should I go now to respond to?
You can respond now.
Okay, so just, to respond to a couple points. So definitely agree about the regional approach, and I think it's important that, and I want to make sure that Councilor Busher has the updated version, because the lines that you cited seemed
I'm
potentially
sorry,
the old version.
I printed out the older one. I apologize. Sorry.
So anyways, but we're requesting that our commissioners on the board really try to initiate this at the GMT board level and see if other communities are willing to participate in a broader study and a broader effort to make the system fare free, or at least explore that, as well as expressing support for the state legislature, which I've heard multiple legislators discuss this idea of covering the fares. It's only 17% of the revenue for GMT that comes through fares. So it's just covering this final 17% of the revenue that would allow the system to be fare free. And the reason that the Gold Loop is included separately is because, unlike many of these routes, the Gold Loop is entirely within the city limits of Burlington. So that's something we could look at specifically as Burlington and potentially take action on as Burlington while we push for these broader changes as well. So that was the idea behind the different clauses here. Thanks. And happy to follow up on advanced transit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Hansen. Councilor Pine.
Thank you, Mr. President. I seconded this, and I will be supporting it, but I do have a number of concerns and reservations, honestly, that I think are important for me to share and explain my thinking on this. I think we all know that a public service that is free is paid for by someone. There's no real free.
That's right.
Someone has to pay for it, right? So who pays for transit? If the rider's not paying, right now the system is the property taxpayer pays the difference. So I think that's important to recognize. And there are many very burdened property taxpayers. So we should be aware of that when we talk about that. We're really just shifting that cost to someone else, unless we come up with alternative revenue sources, which I'd be really excited to hear about, because that's where it starts to get really interesting. There used to be a notion that we would have a regional gas tax for our region, and GMT would get that funding, and that would decouple people from property taxpayers footing the bill for public transit, when in fact people purchasing gasoline would be. But that was shot down. We tried that for many years, tried that in the state legislature. 17% of GMT's budget comes from fares, which is not a huge percentage. But you have to remember, GMT is booking a $900,000 shortfall this year. So unless there's a significant cost savings in eliminating fares, it's going to add to their shortfall, I think, unless we can find other ways to augment their funding. So my goal is increasing ridership and finding the best way to do that, because there's choice riders who need to make the choice to get on the bus and use the bus. There are what they call captive riders who have no other options. They're already using the bus now, for the most part. So I think needs to be done in a very, very thoughtful way. These issues are really quite complicated when you talk about a multi-jurisdictional transit agency, and Medicaid cardholders pay a 50% discount, so there's not really a $1.50 charge to them. There's a 75-cent charge when they use the bus. So there's a whole number of factors and variables. I would rather a study be done that looks at what is the most effective way for us to grow ridership and people choosing to get out of their car and use the bus system. What are those tools at our disposal? I don't know. Staff doesn't have the capacity at GMT or at DPW to do that, but we do have VTrans, we have CCRPC, we have legislators who I believe would like to get their head around this issue. The notion of taxing the rich to do this, while it's appealing, I'm not sure it has a whole lot of traction in the State House. So I think we should just be really focused on what's doable and what we can actually accomplish. And I don't mind leading the way as one city in the regional transit system. So Councilor Busher raises a good point. This is a regional system. It needs to be a regional solution. But it may be appropriate for us to sort of lead the way in that area. But I don't want to presume that fare free transit is that solution. But still, nonetheless, I support this, and I'm going to continue to support the resolution.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Councilor Freeman, and then Councilor Jang. All right. No, Councilor Freeman's up next.
Sorry, I didn't realize. I thought someone was in the queue before me. Thank you. So yeah, I will be supporting this resolution. As Councilor Hansen mentioned, I did campaign on this issue and have talked about it publicly quite a bit, the concept of fare free transit. I think on the national level, what we're seeing is a really big conversation around the Green New Deal and programs like that, and what those programs call for is significant public investment in climate solutions. And that's really, I think, the aspect that I really appreciate about the concept of fare free transit is that it's about having a considerable public investment. If you think of to some points mentioned around there's no, of course it's not free, but it's collectivized, right? It's shared by the community as opposed to put on certain individuals. And for example, we can see that with other public goods like our public education. There's plenty of examples of ways in which public goods enhance our communities significantly. So I absolutely support this, and sort of any ways that we can get people out of cars and out of a transit model that is really just not sustainable, and single occupancy vehicles are part of that. I think I had one more thing, but just to the point, I do think that we should look at routes and expanding service. I think that's a big part of this. Obviously, we need a really integrated system and a regional system to support this, but I'm glad to see that Senator Polina has put this forward in terms of tackling this on a state level, to think of different ways that we can budget for this. I don't think it should just be on municipalities and local entities to support something like this, but I do think programs that focus on public investment in climate solutions is really the future of how we're going to address the climate crisis. So I will be supporting this, and I appreciate the work that was done to bring it to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Freeman. Councilor Jang.
Yes, so I think I'll start by saying to Jack, Councilor Henson, thank you for doing this great job. And I think it is becoming now a pattern where anything about climate change, you're looking into it. I think this is great. And also how this was vetted by GMT and also by DPW. I think that's a great work. And I think it is important for us to start somewhere. And just the fact that we're having the conversation is great. And this is, again, only one study. And I think there are concerns that came up. And one of them, I think, is more about the quality of ridership once it becomes free. Once it becomes free, will we have the same amount of quality for those who choose, such as the gentleman who sold his car and taking the car? But now it becomes free. Homeless, maybe a lot of people can just ride on it. Will we get the same level of quality? And I don't know what is happening in those communities you express here. But I think it would be good also to have that into the mix, to have that question in. Because writing is good, climate change is great, but also having it greatly is always better. Thank you. And I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Jang. Councillor Tracy.
Thank you, President Wright. I will be supporting this. I think that this is a really helpful tool to getting us more information about this exciting idea, an idea that some communities around the country have successfully rolled out recently and have done so on a pretty large scale. I think that in terms of some of the other concerns, there's nothing about gathering information for me that helps us that would prevent us from maybe dealing with some of the challenges that the system is currently facing in the meantime. I see this as really the first step in what will probably be a longer process of identifying funding sources and really figuring out how such a system would work, perhaps negotiating with and talking with and bringing on board neighboring communities to also engage with this. So I think in the meantime, we do know that we have some challenges that we need to address with GMT. For instance, ridership was down after the next gen implementation. There was confusion around some of the routes and the naming of the routes and the transition from numbers to colors that they're addressing. I think there's signage issues at the bus station, for instance, all of which to me are lower hanging fruit in terms of in terms of making gains in terms of transit. I think this is a bigger thing, and so I think it's important to think to really take action on multiple different levels, trying to set that goal in the longer term or maybe the more medium term, or I would hope even a shorter term of getting us to fare free, but in that closest term to really dealing with some of these concerns that we've already identified so that we can at least address some of the downturn in ridership that we've seen while also gathering information to hopefully really really reverse that trend that we've seen in much more substantial ways. So I applaud, Councillor Hansen for bringing this, and I really appreciate the opportunity to get this information. In terms of the funding structure, one other thing that I would say is that there are exciting conversations that are taking place around transportation demand management with regards to the parking minimums conversation in the city. I hope that we can really see those through, and that may be a funding source that we can tap into to help us with some of these initiatives. So look forward to learning more. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tracy. Any other city councillor? Hearing none, all those in favor of this resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Item number 6.11 is a resolution requesting the Vermont Legislature to ensure equitable funding and adjustment to equalize student weighting. Councillor Shannon.
Thank you, President Wright. I move to adopt the resolution and want to make sure that it is noted that President Wright was added by a sponsor when we adopted our agenda. I didn't see it on there, so I just wanted to make sure that that was noted and ask for the floor back after a second.
Seconded by Councillor Pine. Councillor Shannon, you have the floor back.
Thank you. I am very pleased that we've gotten 3/4, I think, of the council to sign on to this resolution, and I think that it's critically important for Burlington. I will shout out to Vermont Digger, who wrote an article last week about the fact that a study has now come out, and that study indicates that the weights for Vermont students that are part of our funding mechanism for education are not empirically based, and they're 20 years old, they're outdated at best, and were never based in anything scientific in the first place. So there's now been a very thorough analysis of the school weights and recommendations for changing those weights. Burlington, there are, of course, winners and losers in this process. Some schools have been really underfunded because the students that they have in the school are more costly students than in other schools. And in some cases, running the school is going to be more expensive, and that hasn't been weighted correctly either. So Really what this is about is making sure that we are providing an equal education to all students in Vermont, and the cost of educating different types of students in different environments is reflected in how we do that. Our school system is suffering under the current weighting guidelines, and we really need that to change. So when we're here looking at our school budget tonight and looking at what a huge increase we have once again in our school budget, and we have struggled with this, and our taxpayers have stepped up year after year, we are doing the right thing in this community, but it is costing us far more to do it than it is costing other communities to do the right thing by their students. So there's one part of this that I think kind of sums up well why we need to do this. It says the values for this is out of our resolution, the values for the existing weights have weak ties, if any, with evidence describing differences in the costs of educating students with disparate needs or operating schools in different contexts. And whereas the study makes clear recommendations based on empirical analysis to adjust student weighting and assure school funding will provide equal opportunities for all students. We need the legislature to act on this, and it's not going to be easy for them. According to the Digger article, it looked like it was moving through the Senate pretty well and a little less certain in the House. I thought that it would behoove us as leaders in Burlington to make our voices known in how important we think this is, and that we all need to be talking to our legislators, our constituents, and making people aware that we need to change this as quickly as possible. We need to change this in this legislative session. This should be a priority for the citizens of Burlington as well as our legislators. And I thank you all for your support of this effort, and hope we will all continue to raise this issue in our circles.
Thank you, Councilor Shannon. Discussion by the City Council? Councilor Paulino.
I want to thank Councilor Shannon for drafting this resolution and really putting this message forward that needs to be said. I was completely disappointed to hear that it's, the chairman of the committee in the House doesn't prioritize this. And this is a huge issue, and it's one that I've put a little bit of time into, that I need to put more time into to try to explain to constituents and try to understand. It's complicated. And I think that it could potentially save us a lot of money if people looked into the numbers and actually fix this system that sounds like it's going to take a while to fix. So even if we do everything correct, it will still, by the time we fix the problem, it'll be years from now. And it's unfortunate that it doesn't seem to be at the top of the list.
Thank you, Councilor Paulino. Other councilors? Hearing none. Just one quick comment, Councilor Shannon. It was a no-brainer for me to support this. I actually sponsored a bill on this in the legislature. Councilor Odie sponsored a bill. And the study actually, I think, came as a result of some of the bills that we sponsored. So I'm happy that that's finally out there, and very supportive of this resolution. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Item number 6.12 is a resolution on refugee resettlement from Councilors Paul and others. Councilor Paul.
Thank you, President Wright. I move to adopt the resolution, waive the reading, and ask for the floor back briefly after a second.
Seconded by Councilor Roof. Councilor Paul, you have the floor back.
Thank you. Briefly, for the benefit of those watching who may not be familiar with what has happened recently and what has happened in September of 2019, the Trump administration issued an executive order requiring that states and localities, requiring communities like us to consent in writing to the resettlement of refugees within the state and locality before refugees would be able to be resettled. Fortunately, advocates who support refugee resettlement filed suit asserting that the order threatened to deprive thousands of refugees of their best chance to build a successful life here, as well as thousands of American families and families living in the United States that are waiting to be reunited with other family members, as well as the tremendous amount of work that has gone in local communities who are working very hard and have been for many years to welcome refugees to their community. While the ruling that did come out last week was against the executive order, it's only preliminary, and there's a possibility that there could be further proceedings against that decision. We in Burlington, as we all know, have a long and proud history with regard to refugee resettlement. We want Burlington to be a place where refugees are able to be resettled, and we feel that they are an important, vital, and valued part of our community. A week ago, January 15th, Mayor Weinberger submitted a letter to the federal government outlining his consent as per the executive order. What this resolution before us does is resolve that the City Council also consents and confirms the mayor's consent to refugee resettlement in Burlington. It also reaffirms Burlington's commitment to our long-standing practice and policy with regard to welcoming immigrants and refugees to our community. Their lives enrich Burlington for all of us. I hope that we can support this important resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Discussion by the City Council? Hearing none. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Paul. Item number 7 is committee reports. Any committee chair that would like to report to City Council? Councillor Tracy.
Thank you, President Wright. The Transportation Energy Utilities Committee met last week in the community room at Riverside Apartments to discuss the Amtrak sighting, or the potential Amtrak sighting there, and to further that conversation. We heard more about some of the impacts noise-wise, as well as emissions-wise, in addition to a big part of our conversation really centered around the cost piece and how much this is going to cost and who's going to pay for it. And I think that our takeaway is that that's still very much being considered and figured out at this point. And so that's something that we're working on and interested in as a city. I know the administration and Director Spencer and his team at Public Works are working on that. We also have another big issue coming up with our committee, and we'll be addressing that on our February 4th meeting, and that has to do with the North Winooski Corridor Study. If you don't know, there's going to be a meeting of the advisory committee on the 28th. I believe that's at 7, and that will be in the Firehouse Gallery. That's the group that's been meeting around this over the last several years and having those conversations. We're getting to the end of those conversations. And then from that point, the idea is that project would come to the Transportation Committee on the 4th, February 4th at 5:30. I believe we're going to be down at DPW for that meeting, and that will be our main item on the agenda, though we also did push some other items in order to deal with exclusively a Amtrak issue, those being the potholes, the combined work plan with CCRPC, and then we did also have a request to get an update on the scooter and the e-bikes, actually, not the scooters, but the e-bikes. So we'll be talking about some of those other issues as well.
Thank you, Councillor Tracy. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, President Wright. The joint committee with the Ordinance Committee and the Planning Commission met last Tuesday to continue its discussion of the housing reform policies. We did have another discussion relating to potential removal of parking minimum requirements. That conversation, I think we're getting close to something on that resolution that will be before the council, and had the kickoff, I will say, of the conversation relating to Airbnb or short-term rentals. Just for everyone's benefit, this room was full of a lot of parties who wanted to be heard. So I anticipate there will be multiple follow-up hearings on short-term rentals before it comes back. That committee is scheduled basically to consume the Planning Commission's meeting time every Tuesday or every other Tuesday all the way until town meeting day. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Jang.
Thank you, President. The Human Resource Policy Committee will be meeting on the January 30th at 5 o'clock, 200 Church Street. So we have three main items, and I think one of them, the committee did a great job in putting the diversity, equity, inclusion job description, in meeting the deadline, in submitting it, and I feel like we will be receiving a more thorough update around that position. And I think the other item that we will be talking about will be the social media policy for the city of Burlington. I mean, yes, we talked about it, public safety, we dropped it, and now it seems that it needs to come back up, and I think the mayor has some great, wonderful things that we need to review. And also, we will be talking about the livable wage data for the city of Burlington. So the meeting is January 30th at 5 o'clock, 200 Jeff Street. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, Councillor Jang. Councillor Pine.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Community Development and Neighborhood Revitalization Committee, affectionately known as CDNR, met last week, and we got a report from Brian Lowe about the upcoming equity report, and I continue to be impressed with that project and the work he's done in that regard, and I think the committee gave him some feedback that I think was pretty helpful and pretty useful. We'll all be seeing that when we go to vote on town meeting day, I think is when it's released, roughly, maybe a little bit before that. But we've spent most of our meeting talking about additional protections for tenants in Burlington, and we barely scratched the surface after a little over an hour on those issues, and we will be continuing to discuss those and take public comments and have committee discussion about the report that CEDO did, and some ideas that are not included in that report, but that we as a committee feel deserve to be discussed more fully. We meet next on the 12th of February. I want to say it's at 5:30, but I'm not exactly sure. So, but it is either 5:30 or 6 on the 12th of February.
Close enough.
Yeah. Have yet to find out the location. Staff is trying to find us a location, so thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Pine. Any other chair? Councillor Shannon. Yes.
Thank you, President Wright. The Parks, Arts, and Culture Committee is going to be meeting this Thursday, January 23rd at 5:30 at the DPW conference room on Pine Street, and we will be discussing the bike path project, an update on City Hall Park, a review of Highlight and the purchase of 405 Pine Street for BCA, as well as the Arts in Public Places Guidelines update, and then also an update on Memorial Auditorium and the Moran Frame project. So pretty much everything that's going on in the city, we're going to review that in 2 hours on Thursday, DPW.
Nice job. Thank you, Councillor Shannon. Are we all set? Any other chair? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 8, City Councilors on General City Affairs. Councillor Busher.
So, yes, I just wanted to call attention to an item that was on consent. It is a communication from BED in the Department of Permitting and Inspection and the Office of City Planning regarding the resolution that we passed regarding electrification of heat and air conditioning systems in new construction. So this caught my eye because I sponsored that, and I think this is just indicative of, I'm always impressed with BED's thoroughness and approach, and I don't want to minimize the contributions that permitting and inspection and planning gave to this, but Darren did share with me that that if we move forward with these ordinance changes as proposed, that we would be one of 2 cities in the U.S. that have taken this bold initiative, and that I think it's really deserving of our attention. He does want to delay coming forward with the ordinance changes because he wants to, all of the departments want to make sure that they talk to people that will be impacted by these proposed changes so that they better understand the problems or some of the proposed process steps, and so they can identify any modifications or changes. It divides the approach by commercial buildings and residential and talks about approved measures. It's very thorough, and it's an easy read and informative, so I hope people do look at that. It won't come back to us probably until the next council, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what the city will do, and hopefully will move in support of making these changes for new development. I did talk to Darren, and the next thing, one of the things I wanted to couple was new development and significant rehab, but rehab was a little more complicated. Once again, I think after this, if this moves forward, then rehabilitation of projects is next. And then it's for all of us that are around the table, homeowners who have existing heating systems that are not solar but fossil fuel, and how we make the transition to a either electric or renewable energy sources for heat and cooling. But I think there's a lot of hope here, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. Any other councilor on general city affairs? Councilor Jang.
Thank you, President. So just yesterday, I was at Channel 17. I'm one of the trustees for Channel 17, and I have a show called Alice Corner. You know, it's monthly, so I invite great people. And I think the last show was a little bit special because nearly a year ago, there was a young African American refugee, former refugee. His name is Mohammed Jafar. Did run for school, for city council, and there were a lot of turmoil about his candidacy because of tweets that he did when he was young. So that same Mohammed Jafar, turned his life around in becoming someone who really engaged in this community, doing an incredible job. I'm not only talking about serving in the board of registration, board of voter registration, but also stepping up in political parties and just showing young people that look like him the way of life in the United States, what it should be. So Mohammed did have a problem, and his problem was, how do we engage new American in our democracy? And what he did, he drove his car to the Secretary of State's office and presented a problem. So that problem, it took him a year to develop a serious, wonderful plan that will be that he will be presenting on the 20th here at 20 Allen Street, and I think it's from 2 to 4, and also another event from on February 8, and it will be in Winooski at the Mallets Bay, and that one is from 11 to 1. Each one of those events is for new Americans to show up and to have a demonstration around how do you vote, how to register, how to vote. And also each of the ballot items for both Winooski and Burlington will be translated. So people will have an idea about exactly who they're voting for, what they're voting for in their own language. And I think it's a young Somalian who did that incredible job. I think he deserves some credit about his work of engaging the most vulnerable in our community. And if any of us see him around, just congratulate him for the great work that he did. And he works full time. He's like the oldest in his family of maybe almost 11 or 12, but he's so engaged in making Burlington a better place. So thank you, Mohammed, if you're watching this. And the show is available, Channel 17, Alice Corner. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jang. Any other city councilor? Hearing none, we will close out item number 8. Item number 9 is council president. No update. I just want to congratulate the city council, every city councilor tonight. I think that it was a great, functioning, efficient body tonight. Have been other meetings as well. Everybody made their points in a concise way, and I think it was a great job. With that, Mr. Mayor, bring us home.
I hope I don't ruin that record here, President Ray, with the final moments. I'll
didn't
try to
include
be
you in that.
direct and concise, too. Three things from me. First of all, I appreciate the council's ratification of the letter that I sent to Secretary Pompeo. I was confident that this council would be supportive of that, given our long history of supporting refugee resettlement to Burlington. It is really quite amazing and I think underappreciated, this aspect of the Trump administration's immigration policy. They have, at the announcement of this letter, the release of this letter, when I was joined by a woman from Vermont Refugee Resettlement, Amila, she pointed out that since the final year of the Obama administration, when the country saw 110,000 new Americans resettled, refugees resettled in America, the figure has dropped in the most recent year. I believe the figure she cited was all the way down to 18,000, from 110,000 to 18,000. This is an effort, and we will see where the administration intends to take it, to at least save what remains of the program and not see it cut further, zeroed out entirely. And we will continue to fight as a city in every way we can against these draconian immigration policies that are really, I think, are abandoning America's historic role in the world and really amount to a moral outrage. Two pieces of good news here in Burlington. I did just want to highlight, I think, really significant expansions of city government, about what our local government is doing in a way that responds directly to the requests and the desires of residents. The new permit center is open down on Pine Street. If you haven't been in there yet, you're in for a treat the next time you go into the facility. It's gone through a significant renovation that has, even more than the kind of bricks and mortar changes, represents a major change in city governance that this council has strongly supported, and I hope everyone who was involved in the permit reform effort for a number of years feels that with this opening of the new permit center, combined with the co-location now of a new permitting inspections department, plus the clarified accountability, represented the single point of accountability now for the permit system, that there has really been a response to this resident and council desire for change in this area. Clear metrics have been established about what we hope to achieve in the first year of this new department. Bill Ward will be reporting back to the public and to you as the year unfolds about the success of that. And then finally, news just from earlier today, the city is now engaged with the state Vermont alert system in a new way. We have now going forward the capacity to issue local alerts on a whole range of municipal, emergent, and emergency and otherwise time-sensitive urgent issues, ranging from beach closures to boil water notices to snow bans. The system, I think, really gives us great new capacity to communicate instantaneously with Burlingtonians, and especially given some of the conversations tonight, there is no additional cost to the city for this service. The thing that is required, however, to make it work is that Burlingtonians need to sign up. There are already about 4,000 Burlingtonians who have signed up through other ways in which people enter the Vermont alert system. But if you want to get notices like this from city government about these emergency and otherwise urgent, time-sensitive issues, you need to go to the city webpage and sign up there. And we're going to be doing a lot of efforts over the coming weeks to push this out. It's good news, and I think this came as a result. People may find interesting. You may remember the boil water notice that we had to issue last summer, where we struggled to communicate to the affected area. And that really brought home that this was an area that we could do better. And I directed the creation of a cross-departmental team that worked really hard on this for a number of months and resulted in today's announcement. We're excited about it. Look forward to any feedback you hear from constituents about how this works. With that, President Wright, I think we are I hope I didn't overstay the efficiency requirement, but I'm all done.
Good job, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you. And just thank you to Chief Locke for getting us through a rough patch here and seeing us through and back to the 2 weeks left still.
So Catherine doesn't start until February 17th,
right.
so you're stuck with the current team for a couple more meetings here.
Okay, great. With that, motion to adjourn. Councilor Roof, seconded by Councilor Freeman. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.